Welcome, Joseph.
Thank you again so much for having River at your festival.
Oh, well, everybody loved it. They'll talk to you about it. It's about 4:45 in the afternoon our time. So it's early morning where you are. And thank you so much for agreeing to do this, because I'm sure that the audience has questions for you. I just wanted to say that it was not only beautiful, but powerful. And I was really taken with the Australian Symphony. Now, how did you decide to do that, and how did you get them to do it?
So yeah, the Australian Chamber Orchestra have been an integral part of the conception of River and the creation of River. Jen actually originally worked with them on the previous film Mountain. River in many ways is a sort of spiritual successor or sequel to Mountain, which was first released in 2017. And my association with the Australian Chamber Orchestra goes back even earlier. I worked with them for several years, since, between around 2013, 2019, I worked closely with their artistic director and violinist, Richard Tognetti, as a sort of creative assistant, and then eventually working with him as an arranger and composer and orchestrator. But yeah, the role of music in the film is an incredibly important one. We always intended that the film be a sort of heightened encounter with nature. And for us, it isn't just the imagery and sorry, there's an alarm going off. It isn't just the imagery and the narration that does that, but the music is sort of the special sort of source that we hope can invite people into that sort of heightened experience with nature that we're trying to communicate, this big journey through time. So yeah, the relationship with the Australian Chamber Orchestra on the film is totally essential. That's why Jen, wanted them just front and center at the start of the film, whether you're seeing this on the big screen, as a cinema experience, or whether you get the chance to see it as River Live, as a live performance with the orchestra, which it will be touring as. She wanted the audience just to have that just front and center in their mind, that they are going into a musical performance, and that the role of music in the film will be, maybe more exaggerated than they used to in a typical documentary as well.
Yes, so much so. It wraps the visual in just so much importance and emotionality. I mean, this film is a lot about visual learning. You're not lecturing anyone. You're really showing them what happened. And so can you tell us a little bit about the filmmaking process? You have some incredible drone footage in there. Just tell us a bit about how you made it.
Yeah, absolutely. So my role in the film was as a co-writer and co-director, and it was just an enormous privilege to be invited to join the project by the director and writer, Jennifer Peetham. So the creation of the film involved her pulling together just an incredible team of collaborators. So she was writing and directing. Simon Yo, edited the film. Robert McKenzie worked on sound. And then in terms of bringing together the visual side of it, the first day of production of the film ended up being the first day of lockdowns in Australia. So we had planned and scheduled to do a lot of shooting internationally, to go out to shoot, around Australia, in the outback, to New Zealand, India, many other places in the world, to kind of fill the story out that we'd already written and conceived. But when we realized that wasn't going to be possible in the way that we'd imagined, we needed to find a different way to bring the movie together visually in terms of accessing all those visuals. And Jen is just one of these people that just attracts incredible talent to her. So across working on her previous films, Sherpa and Mountain, she'd built this network of incredible cinematographers around the world. So Renan Ozturk, Anson Fogel, many other cinematographers that she'd collaborated with before. And through them, we were able to meet other people who, at different points and in different times, were able to go out and do shooting for us, or alternatively had libraries of footage that, potentially they had shot for different projects that had never been used before, that they were excited about, sharing with us and making open for us to license for the film. So it was then really a question of how do we tell the same strong visual story that we were hoping to tell anyway, but rather than globetrotting and shooting a lot of it ourselves, how do we collaborate with a network of people who are able actually to move around and get these shots? And in the case of that drone footage, that was, another aspect of bringing the project together visually was then just footage research. When we just needed really particular kind of targeted gaps, we'd bring a sequence together, we'd have an amazing run of footage and say India, and we'd say, okay, that sequence is set. But there'd be a certain other moment where we'd say, okay, we really need to feel, a stronger kind of visual story unfolding here. And one of those moments was the moment where we have the birth of the river. And that just came out. We were looking, I was looking around on YouTube at various kind of different drone operators and drone pilots, looking on Vimeo and a lot of other services as well. And we came across this unbelievably talented FPV drone operator called Ralph Hogenberg. FPV stands for first person view. And it's a style of drone operation where you kind of pilot the drone straight forward. And it's quite amazing. You see them piloting these drones, and they're wearing goggles. They're really locked in as though they are inside the drone flying it. And by piloting the drone that way, these drone operators are able to fly extremely close to landscape and to buildings and to other kind of features in the environment. And he had done this shoot down this glacier in Norway that just perfectly captured the moment of the birth of River in the most extraordinarily powerful way. And he was kind enough, again, when we reached out, he'd heard of Mountain, he'd seen it before, he was really interested in Jen's work, and he was just kind enough to open up his rushes so that we could work with this incredible long extended take. And once we paired it with music and sound and narration, and that moment was kind of working in the film, that was probably one of the most exciting moments.
Perfect.
In bringing the film together.
Yeah. I mean, it's thrilling. And actually follow the curves of it, and it was close. And who did all that at the end of the film? But you had amazing cloud footage. That was just extraordinary. How did that happen?
Yeah, again, so that was another example of just footage research and looking around and trying to find people who had done similar kind of work that we were hoping to complete ourselves. In this case, it was cloud time-lapse footage. And we found a number of incredible just time-lapse cinematographers. One of them goes by the name Timestorm online. And there's another one or two whose names are escaping me at the moment. But they had these libraries of footage that weren't necessarily intended to tell that story, that particular story of the hydrological cycle of precipitations in the ocean, carrying moisture back over land and starting the story again. But through the lens of the bigger story that Robert McFarlane and Jen Peterm had written, that footage, those time lapses, were able to tell this physical journey of carrying you back from the ocean to the mountains. So I think that's another just really great example there of Jen and Robert's vision, the writing, really coming first. There was a really strong, clear story that they wanted to tell. There were strong, clear ideas about humanity, landscape, and the human heart that they wanted to communicate, a strong physical journey that they wanted to communicate, and then just finding the right kind of collaborators to work with visually on it who could really then fill in that and help us to tell that story in the most powerful way.
And it completes the cycle, doesn't it? You don't think about, I mean, we were in rivers 3/4 of the film, and then suddenly, this is a loop with rain from the sky feeding the rivers and penetrating. I mean, here on Long Island, we live right over our aquifer. So water is extremely important, wetlands, clean water, aquifer, non-source pollution. So we're into that. I thought the one small hopeful moment in that film was when you shot the salmon that finally are free, and they're going upstream because they had a river to navigate. And so there was hope there in the midst of a lot of destruction.
Yes.
So,
And that's one example of in terms of the visual construction of the film. We knew that dams and damming were going to be a big feature of the story, that they're the most literal visual example of humanity's ability to control rivers and how quickly that's changed in the last 100 years. We've gone from having no dams over 20 or 30 meters high at the start of the 20th century to thousands of them at this point in time. And it is time for a lot of those to come down. A lot of them, when they were designed and built, were designed and built with the best of intentions, but we now know that they're extremely damaging to many ecosystems, and many of them are actually quite dangerous. It wasn't well understood at the time how sediment transport would result in silt and sediment building up behind these dams. Many of them are, dangerous enough and will kind of come down of their own accord if they're not safely dismantled. And there have been, many incredible movements around the world in places like America, where the dams have been up the longest. Many of these dams are approaching the end of their life cycle. It's now also happening in Eastern Europe as well. So those are the sort of two locations where you do see footage of dam removal, and some of those, the footage of protests around damming are occurring in Eastern Europe as well. But we also had a lot of originally commissioned and shot footage for dams done in Washington State, which really has been one of the places where you've seen dam recovery, or the recovery of ecosystems after dams have come down most visibly, including salmon migrations returning just unbelievably fast. And there's that beautiful line in the film, given the chance, their life pours back. It's talking about rivers, but we do know that given the chance, ecosystems can really flourish so quickly again that seem like they're either destroyed or on the brink of destruction.
We had a question in the audience, Joseph, that where was the dam that was blown up in the movie? There were one or two of them.
Yes, yeah, I believe that they are both in Washington State. Those, State. Yeah. So those two that are actually featured in the film, there's a fantastic project from a couple of years ago called Dam Nation, which really thoroughly explores that specific issue of the salmon migrations in Washington State. And those filmmakers were actually kind enough to share some of the footage from that project with us. So that very specifically is about, I think it's off the top of my head, I think it was maybe one is on the Snake River, and is the Columbia River potentially, is that in Washington State? But they're both in that region, and they're both connected to stories of really radical environmental recovery after they've come down.
Right, it was good to see them blown up. On that, Joseph, I'm sure there are some questions in the audience.
Yeah,
so there's one right here. Okay, Claudia.
The film was beautiful and so impactful. It's incredible. So I have two questions. One, there was a section where the river had dried up and there were huge numbers of dead fish on the sides, and I'm just wondering where that was.
Yeah, absolutely. So the filmmakers live and work in New South Wales, the state of New South Wales in Australia. We all work out of Sydney, and it was kind of painful to realise as we were making the project that in New South Wales, maybe more than anywhere else in the world, we get river management wrong. There's an incredible, beautiful, ancient river system here called the Murray-Darling River System, and it's caught in this strange tussle between different states vying for different amounts of water use. It's caught between different industries and local communities sort of going after it and trying to get as much water out of it as they can. And it very often goes to drought in Australia. And because the demands in the river are so high, we've had just some terrible ecological disasters in the last 10 to 20 years in Australia. One of them was this famous fish die-off that happened at a place called Menindee Lakes. And it really happens that there are fish that migrate into these lake systems that are connected to the river. They become disconnected from the river. And in that case, the river itself, or the lake itself rather, once disconnected from that river system, fully dried out. And you have enormous stretches of the river, which at different times have been bone dry. So that I think that's a painful set of images for any Australian to see and to look at. And it's a tragedy that I think is especially sort of on the minds of Indigenous communities and caretakers who look after that river system. That was a number of years ago. Thankfully, right now at the moment, that there's been a lot of rain in Australia, which has led to flooding in places in New South Wales as well. Unfortunately, because our river planning isn't great in that direction either. But those wetlands have been restored, at least for now. But yeah, that is the location of those, the Menindee Lakes in New South Wales.
And then my other question, I think a lot of us want to know whether the kayakers that went over the waterfall survived in one piece.
Yes, they did. So that they were primarily from a a shoot that happened in Mexico. So that was Anson Fogel, who was again one of the key cinematographers who contributed to Mountain, was involved in this extraordinary kayaking expedition in Mexico. Yeah, that stuff is terrifying. Yeah.
Especially when you see the paddle flying in the air, you
Yes.
don't see the body.
Yeah, no, extraordinary.
There's another question, Joseph.
Well, first of all, good night, Mike. Good to hear good Aussie accent.
Yeah.
I used to live in that country.
Can you hear that? He wanted to
Any
know if you
dams?
have any dams in
Dams in
Australia.
Australia?
Oh, yes. Any dams? Yes, we do. So, and at the moment, and this is a historical truth, obviously, around the world, but many cities rely on dams. That many cities have been have grown off the back of having water supplies that can deal with. In Sydney, we have something like 4 million people here, and so yeah, there's Warragamba Dam and a number of dams feed into Sydney, and I know that's true of the other states as well. There's actually been a recent political tussle here in Sydney. The state government wants to increase the height of the dam wall in response to some flooding that's happened recently, but they want to rush that through without actually considering the ecological impacts of increasing that dam height. And they're especially kind of reluctant to accept that increasing the dam height will actually make future flooding even worse when it does happen. It's a complicated kind of political argument there. A lot of people who are worried about increasing that dam wall height are pretty convinced that it's just the real estate lobby pushing for increasing the dam wall, because over time that will increase more places to actually build more houses in. Again, there'll be places that are even in more danger. So I think that there's a big conversation to be had in terms of long-term water strategy in Sydney. And this is just a question of political will. I mean, for me, just they're tough questions, they're thorny questions. They're probably not the kind of questions that politicians want to have on their agenda, big, expensive, complicated water infrastructure strategies. But I think as we learn more, it is really our duty to do more and to do better. And that's going to be a different story, wherever you are in the world. But yeah, there are signs for hope in certain places. I mean, along the Murray-Darling recently, there have been these donations that private individuals and private organizations have given in terms of their water allocations, coming together to kind of create these pulses of water that purely have ecological value. There was a famous example of one of these down the Colorado River, actually, maybe it was about 3-4 years ago. There was a coordinated ecological pulse of water that a number of stakeholder states in the lower United States came together and agreed to, and allowed the Colorado to flow right down, through these communities in Mexico, and right down to the bay. And it had these incredible kind of knock-ons in terms of ecological impact. So there is hope. People can come together and coordinate. We hope that this film is, just one of many stories that's out there that can help people understand, something that we've really forgotten. I think as a species, just how important and how sacred and how special rivers and lakes are.
Indeed, especially during Earth Weekend. And everybody has a heightened awareness of the environment.
Yes.
Is there another question? Another question in the audience? Over here? Wait.
What areas in Asia were represented? Because I saw some rivers that seemed to be of an Asian persuasion, so I didn't know where they were.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's one particular sequence in the film explores agriculture in Southeast Asia. It looks at that as a bit of an on-ramp to then looking at mass industrialization using water. And during that scene, we cover a whole range of Southeast Asian countries. So from memory, there's shoots that we were working with in Cambodia, Myanmar, certainly Vietnam as well. But yeah, there were many locations that were connected to the Mekong and to other Southeast Asian countries, certainly Indonesia too. Yeah, and lots in India during the one sequence on the Ganges and at Varanasi, where you sort of saw the cremation of the bodies by the side of the river.
Yes, that is having been there, that is an extraordinary spiritual place. So Joseph, what's your next film?
So we are thinking and dreaming at the moment and hoping that we'll be able to make a sort of third film to complete a trilogy of films around the idea of mountain, river, and then a third topic, but it's still very, very early days. We're trying to figure out, what that story should be or could be, what story could really complement the other two. River itself had a very long development cycle. This film started as water, in fact. But there are 1,000 different movies you could make about water. I think the connection between water and humans is so biologically and culturally sort of fundamental. There's so many stories to tell there. River ended up being the perfect way to narrow that down. We have some ideas for what we'd like to do with a third film, but again, wouldn't want to speak too soon before we've really found
Or you do it.
narrow it down.
Well, we opened the Doc's Equinox with Aquarella.
Oh, yes.
Professor Coffey's film, and it was just brilliant because he shot it in 96 and 96 frames and Atmos sound, and no narration, and it just blew you away. It was so powerful and beautiful.
Yeah.
And he too didn't want to do something ordinary about water. How you can parse water and the elements is a challenge, but you did a beautiful, beautiful job with River. And are there any more questions? Okay, Joseph, nothing more from our end except lots of appreciation. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much again for featuring the film and for having me along to speak.
Thank you, and thanks for being with us so early.
My pleasure. That's it.